Franja del Pacífico. Esto a mí me sorprendió cuando lo escuché, y no sé si todos lo saben, pero nuestro país tiene 6 veces más territorio en el agua que en la tierra. Entonces nosotros queremos explotar la Franja Pacífico, como pueden ver, esa es la parte de abajo del mapa de El Salvador, iniciando en la ciudad de La Unión, y luego los proyectos que van en la Franja Pacífico. Cuando alguien habla del aeropuerto, del puerto, no, esto es dentro de un proyecto. El proyecto se llama Franja Pacífico, y ese proyecto de Franja Pacífico incluye el puerto de Cutuco, que lo vamos a poner a funcionar después de más de 10 años de estar tirado.
Funcionarios del gobierno de El Salvador recibieron el buque Blue Wave Harmony en el muelle multipropósito del puerto de La Unión. Estas acciones forman parte del inicio de operaciones del ferry que conectará El Salvador y Costa Rica en los puertos de La Unión y Caldera respectivamente.
De toda la región. Ahora, a través de este sistema marítimo de corta distancia, se reducen los tiempos de traslado de las mercancías de 96 horas a 18 horas entre El Salvador y Costa Rica. Además de esto, se reduce el tráfico vehicular en las carreteras, el deterioro de las mismas y el costo de su mantenimiento. También se reduce la contaminación medioambiental, así como también las posibilidades de sufrir accidentes viales en las diferentes calles, entre otros beneficios que implican proyectos como este, que tuvo que esperar 4 décadas para convertirse en una realidad.
Incluye el centro logístico, el aeropuerto del Pacífico, el puerto pesquero, la escuela de navegantes, el centro oceanográfico, Surf City. Surf City ha sido un proyecto insignia de este gobierno. Aquí, que estamos donde se inició Surf City, que ahora se llama Surf City 1. ¿Por qué Surf City 1? Bueno, porque ya lanzamos la construcción de Surf City 2, que es un poco la contraparte de lo que lanzamos en Punta Manco, que ya era Surf City 2, fase 1. Pero ¿qué hicimos ya? Bueno, construimos el camino a Surf City, acabamos de terminar el redondel El Utila, revitalizamos el parque de aventuras Walter Tilo Denninger, mejoramos el complejo turístico del Puerto de Libertad y construimos sistemas de tratamiento aguas residuales en el Tunco y en el Zonte. Además, hemos hecho 7 torneos de surf de calidad mundial y solo estos proyectos que les he mencionado han generado alrededor de 15,000 empleos. Por eso decidimos mencionarlo acá, porque acá ustedes pueden verlo. Lo pueden ver aquí atrás, en este hermoso parque, que es parte de la cooperación de la República Popular China. Lo pueden ver allá, en el nuevo muelle. Va a tener restaurantes, cafés. Pero este día queremos lanzar acá el Surf City 1, pero fase 2, que incluye la plaza gastronómica. Bueno, para recordarlo, terminamos el mercado del mar. Aparte de eso, estamos hoy en la inauguración de Sunset Park. Es un parque fijo, es un parque que siempre va a estar aquí e incluye los juegos mecánicos, la taquilla, kioscos de golosinas, souvenirs, servicios sanitarios y área de enfermerías. Aparte de eso, todas las escuelas del municipio van a ser remodeladas. Vamos a remodelar el centro histórico del Puerto de la Libertad. Pero también remodelar el mercado municipal. Creamos el cuerpo de guardavidas. Contamos con un espacio de emergencias médicas del 132, tenemos ya un espacio de lactancia materna. Aparte de eso, hay otro proyecto muy bonito para la juventud de la zona costera, que es GastroLab. Y graduados de esta escuela para chef ya cuentan todos con empleo aquí en los restaurantes. La carretera del litoral la vamos a ampliar a 4 carriles. Es una inversión de $203 millones. Va a ser de 21 kilómetros. E incluye ciclovía en los 21 kilómetros, la construcción de un nuevo sistema de drenaje, va a traer pasos peatonales, va a incluir 14 puentes, toda la carretera va a tener cableado eléctrico subterráneo, obras de taludes para evitar deslizamientos, van a haber 7 retornos, va a haber la construcción del parqueo en la ciudad del puerto, va a tener semaforización inteligente y peatonal, va a tener 5 miradores, 3 plazoletas. Esta obra va a ayudar no solo a mejorar el Surf City, sino que va a revitalizar la economía y el turismo de nuestro país. El Zonte, para muchos, sobre todo extranjeros, es conocido como Bitcoin Beach. Vamos a arreglar un área de 15,000 metros cuadrados, va a haber diversidad de atractivos, centro comercial, parqueo, club de playa, accesos peatonales, todo público, para revitalizar un poco el área de Bitcoin Beach del Zonte en Surf City. Obviamente, el turismo en nuestro país tiene un gran potencial y ustedes lo pueden ver con estas hermosas playas y con nuestro hermoso clima y con nuestros hermosos lugares. Dios nos dio un paraíso. Queda lanzada la fase 2 de Surf City 1 y pues aprovechamos con la señora embajadora a inaugurar Sunset Park.
Realiza el corte la señora embajadora de la República Popular China, Oye Wong.
Tenemos que preparar a nuestro país para la cuarta revolución industrial. Y de esa manera vamos a tener un desarrollo económico de verdad. El proyecto 4A es el proyecto para cuadruplicar la capacidad del puerto de Acajutla. Actualmente, los técnicos dicen, necesitamos duplicar la capacidad del puerto de Acajutla. Sí, pero eso es para los próximos 5 años. Pero nuestra visión debe ser para los próximos 20 años. Planificar para cuadruplicar la capacidad del puerto de Acajutla. Y esto va a beneficiar no solo a Acajutla, va a beneficiar a Sonsonate. Y no solo a Sonsonate, va a beneficiar a todo nuestro país.
En este caso, hemos firmado el convenio con Astican, que es una empresa española que también tiene operaciones en Panamá, que ellos tienen y administran, operan puertos y de igual forma astilleros.
Los firmantes para la toma de fotografía, ahí está, justo para la firma y la toma de fotografía oficial.
Y así desarrollamos una gran parte de nuestro país con el proyecto de la Franja Pacífico. Tenemos pueblos coloniales, café, montañas, ruinas, volcanes, tendremos gastronomía, turismo, hoteles boutiques, muelles de pesca, zonas libres, centros de convenciones, puertos pesqueros, pesca deportiva, surf, etc. Para desarrollar nuestro país y generar cientos de miles de empleos de verdad. El tren de la costa. Ese sería el tren.
Megaproyectos del monorriel en la ciudad de San Salvador y el Tren del Pacífico. Se llevó a cabo la cumbre de la Unión Europea y la Comunidad de Estados Latinoamericanos y Caribeños, CELAC. En la cita, organizada en Bélgica, se trataron diversos temas que van desde desarrollo hasta la transición verde, y en la que El Salvador fue seleccionado entre 135 proyectos a nivel latinoamericano y del Caribe para obtener financiamiento para diversos proyectos, incluidos la puesta en marcha del Tren del Pacífico y el monorriel en el Gran San Salvador. El Salvador estuvo representado por la canciller Alexandra Gil Tinoco y la ministra de Economía María Luisa Hayem. Se amplió el alcance del proyecto Global Gateway, donde El Salvador fue seleccionado entre 135 proyectos para obtener financiamiento para los megaproyectos del Tren del Pacífico y el monorriel en la ciudad capital. El monto del financiamiento asciende a $450 millones, de los cuales 150 serán destinados para poner en marcha el proyecto del Tren del Pacífico y otros 300 millones para el monorriel en el Gran San Salvador, según lo informó el Ministerio de Economía. Este plan propuesto por la Agencia Internacional de Cooperación de Corea, OICA, por sus siglas en inglés. El plan incluye 4 componentes: transporte público, red de carreteras, seguridad vial y transporte no motorizado, con un presupuesto de $2.3 mil millones. La propuesta sobre el componente de transporte público incluye la innovadora implementación de un monorriel, es decir, un tren urbano arriba de la superficie, con una capacidad para desplazar a los salvadoreños del oriente al occidente del Gran San Salvador. Como punto de inicio tendría la terminal de buses de Soyapango y como punto de finalización Santa Tecla. De acuerdo a la propuesta, este monorriel circularía por todo el Boulevard del Ejército hasta llegar al Reloj de Flores, atravesando el centro histórico sobre la calle Rubén Darío para conectar con la Alameda Roosevelt, pasando por la plaza en honor al divino Salvador del mundo y sobre la Alameda Manuel Enrique Araujo, para después conectar con la carretera panamericana hasta finalizar en Santa Tecla, donde habría otra terminal de transferencia, en teoría conectada con el Tren del Pacífico. Para lograr esta conexión se debe primero consolidar el sistema de transporte que permita que estos dos componentes se engranen. La Agencia de Cooperación considera que entre 2023 y 2028 se puede llegar a consolidar esta conexión. Otro componente de la propuesta de transporte público es la implementación de un moderno sistema de teleférico que serviría para conectar los distritos de San Salvador. Se ha propuesto conectar Panchimalco y los Planes de Renderos desde la Terminal del Sur, Otra propuesta para el circuito de teleférico funcionaría desde Soyapango y Ciudad Delgado hasta las inmediaciones de La Tiendona. Otra parte de esta innovadora propuesta funcionaría para viajar desde Cuscatancingo hasta las cercanías de la Universidad de El Salvador, incluso llegar a conectar con Ayotuxtepeque y San Luis Mariona. Además, otro sistema de teleférico que conectaría el Redondel Masferrer con el volcán de San Salvador. Estos dos proyectos representarían una gran ayuda para los salvadoreños, ahorrando tiempo, combustible, paciencia y al mismo tiempo contribuyendo a la reducción de emisiones, pues se propone que estos sistemas sean eléctricos. Tanto el teleférico como el monorriel ofrecerían unas vistas impresionantes y perspectivas diferentes de la capital salvadoreña. Otro componente de este plan maestro es la creación de una ciclovía en las áreas de la ciudad con capacidad para soportar este tipo de carriles, además de la implementación de un sistema de bicicletas públicas para la movilización. Esto contribuiría en gran medida a la reducción del tráfico, a promover el ejercicio diario y la salud, así como también la reducción de emisiones. El plan maestro también incluye la innovación de la red de carreteras, proponiendo mejorar la capacidad del Boulevard de los Próceres, el cual sufre de un tráfico lento a casi toda hora del día. También la del Boulevard de los Héroes, la calle Montserrat y la construcción de un nuevo corredor que rodee todo San Salvador, además de un bypass en Apopa.
¿Qué hace el tren? Conecta el puerto de Cutuco con el de Cajutla. Conecta el puerto de Cutuco con el aeropuerto de La Unión, el puerto de Cutuco con el aeropuerto de Comalapa, el puerto de Cajutla con el aeropuerto de Comalapa. Lleva personas de Aguachapán a La Unión en 1 hora y media. Lleva productos frescos, que desembarquen en un puerto y los lleva a San Salvador en horas. Esto va a ser un detonante del desarrollo de nuestro país y va a generar también miles de empleos reales. Estamos en el centro del centro de América. Así que nuestro tren, que inicialmente es un proyecto nacional, se convertiría en un proyecto regional que nos conectaría con Guatemala, con Honduras, con Nicaragua, con Costa Rica y con Panamá. Y hay otra cosa interesante también. Como tenemos a Cajutla y el Golfo de Fonseca, si nosotros conectamos el tren con uno de los dos países, el que quiera, el que se ponga menos los moños, conectamos nuestro tren con los puertos de ellos y las mercaderías que vienen de China, de Taiwán, de Corea, de Japón, llegarían a nuestro puerto, desembarcarían, irían por tren al Caribe y luego llegarían a Miami, sin pasar por el canal de Panamá, ahorrando tiempo y costo. Seríamos el equivalente a la ruta de la seda.
I was going to present to you Bitcoin City. There you have El Salvador, you have the geothermal plant. Well, close to there. The Fonseca Gulf. And it's going to include everything: residential areas, commercial areas, services, museums, entertainment, bars, restaurants, airport, port, rail, everything devoted to Bitcoin. So at the beginning, we will power the city with the old volcano and power plant, but then we will build a new one right next to the city. And the volcano will power the whole city and will also power the mining.
Okay, I know what you're thinking, and let's not delay it any longer. Where does that volcano come in? Well, the idea is that placing the city right next to this one, named Conchagua, will enable it to be used as a power source. Bitcoin City will tap into the geothermal energy that the volcano produces below ground, funneling it into the grid. It works like this. When water is heated underground by the volcano, it makes lots of steam, enough to turn a turbine, which generates electricity. Because it creates virtually no emissions and the volcano provides a constant source of heat, it's a completely renewable and clean, if somewhat terrifying, form of energy. As for what the plan is if the volcano erupts, well, there are no confirmed reports of it ever doing so. It's fair to say the new residents of Bitcoin City are hoping that status quo continues. Now, before you dismiss this plan as just a load of hot air, the Salvadorian government is apparently already doing something similar in another part of the country. A little further to the west, steam from the Tecapa volcano is being used to carry out Bitcoin mining, a process that's come under fire for the amount of energy it requires. Bitcoin mining involves getting powerful computer systems to solve complex mathematical sums, which creates new units of currency that are then entered into circulation on this thing called the blockchain.
And in the middle, you would have a huge plaza, which would be from the air, you will look at it as a Bitcoin sign. So you have everything. Regulations, new economic policies, digital zones. The Fonsecan Gulf is shared by Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. So this will be in an international area. The government will provide the land, the public infrastructure, the economic areas will attract investors that will contribute to the development and construction of the city. And of course, Bitcoin City is committed to free and equal access to everything. We'll have digital and tech educations, and the social polycentric urban configuration, which has a small dent for the volcano there. That's the division. I will not bore you with those things, but you have social amenities, residential, the green areas, and we're going to have industrial and office space, and also everything is going to be a digital environment. Everything has been taken into consideration: recreation, electricity, water treatment and waste management, etc. The volcano will, you know how it works. It powers the hot water steam that powers the turbine, that powers an energy generator, and then we have electricity, crypto mining, warehousing, tourism, entertainment, and culture and sports. Everything clean and coming from the volcano. In Bitcoin City, of course, it's in El Salvador, so Bitcoin is legal tender. That's nice. Not enough, probably nothing. But we'll have zero income tax, zero capital gains tax, zero property tax. I mean, if you're making a huge building, you don't want to pay property tax for that. Zero payroll tax. We want you to hire people, not to pay taxes for hiring people. Zero municipal taxes. And zero CO2 emissions.
And he just released what's called Bitcoin City, where he's having basically said no income taxes, no property taxes, no cap gains taxes. And he said, everybody come and make as much money as you want.
Is that in a specific area or the entire country?
Well, it's in this Bitcoin City, which is a specific area.
It's kind of like a free trade zone.
A free trade zone. So back to my thesis, which is the same people living in the same geographic region could be under two different jurisdictions or two different types of laws, if you will. And so free trade zones are exactly perfect analogies for that, or examples of that. And so basically he's created this area, said everybody come, and it creates this competition loop. And then one other thing that he's done that's amazing is he's launched this Bitcoin bond. So he has a $1 billion bond, which the El Salvador bonds, they go at about 13.5% right now. He's only given it at 6.5%. He's offering to take half of that bond, 500 billion, and use it to build out Bitcoin mining along the volcano.
500 million, yeah.
Which we can talk about. And then the other 500 is going to go to building out the infrastructure of the city. What they're also doing is they're going to have a 5-year holding period on the bond, and then they'll start to sell some of the Bitcoin in order to pay additional yield on the bond. And the way they've mapped it out, which I think is a little bit aggressive, but they think the bond could end up paying about 150% when it's fully paid out. And I think this is going to be a massive success. The reason why I say that is Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy, he famously last year put their entire treasury, $500 million, into Bitcoin. Since then, he went on to raise, I think, 3 rounds of debt to buy Bitcoin. Each one of them was oversubscribed. He raised $1.5 billion for that. In the last 2 months, we've seen, I think, 6 different publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies raise debt to buy Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining equipment. And so we've seen 6 or 7 examples of oversubscription, of massive success. I think this $1 billion is going to get taken very quickly. But what happens when a nation state can raise $1 billion in the private market and doesn't need to rely on the IMF?
Yeah. How do you see interest rates increasing playing into that?
Well, interest rates in what?
Basically the price of Bitcoin, because the price of Bitcoin is what we're talking about with Saylor and what we're talking about with this gentleman in El Salvador. So as an example, if interest rates go to 20%, then there's going to be some risk assets are going to struggle. And also going back to the Eurodollar futures curve, if we do have a stock market crash, then people are going to sell anything they can sell. So because they need liquidity. Usually that's gold in the short term if we go back to the GFC. But now a lot more of those balance sheets with those hedge funds that need liquidity have Bitcoin instead of gold.
Yeah.
So is there a risk there to the price if interest rates increase or we see lower economic activity globally, a recession, maybe a stock market crash?
Yeah. So first of all, rates are coming down. So they're paying 13.5% now, and now they're going to pay 6.5% on the bond. So rates are actually coming down, I think, based off the Bitcoin bond. But back to the bigger question, as far as it being a risk-off asset and selling off like gold typically would, it hasn't been around long enough to really know. But I like to look at what happened to gold in 2008. So the stock market dropped about almost 60%. Gold dropped about 25%. Yeah. But the gold reclaimed its previous high in about 7 months, and then went on to go from a low of 680 to almost 2,000, whereas the stock market took 7 years to recapture its all-time high. And then we can look at March 2020, same thing, gold dipped, but this time we had Bitcoin. Bitcoin obviously took a massive dip as well, about a 50% drop. But without any circuit breakers, without a plunge protection team, they managed to come back and again shoot to new crazy all-time highs. So it was about, I forget now, $6,000-$7,000, dropped down to about $3,500, and then of course went on to $68,000. So just like gold did in 2008, just like we saw in March 2020, I would expect probably the same thing to happen, because it's not so much about the crash, it's the government's response to the crash.
Yep.
If the markets drop 20%, which a lot of people think, or even bigger, 60-80%, I mean, we'll see money printing probably at a level that we've never seen before. And so there's initial knee-jerk reaction. I think trying to trade that dip would be very difficult. And then I would imagine it would just take off to new all-time highs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The only tax, the value-added tax, 10% value-added tax. So we talked with my friend Samson from Blockstream. Yeah, Samson here, here.
This is a very historic moment. We're going to be issuing Bitcoin bonds. Do you guys like Bitcoin bonds? And these bonds are amazing. The first one is going to be a $1 billion bond. And what makes it a Bitcoin bond is because it's backed by Bitcoin. So half of the $1 billion will go into buying Bitcoin. So the president is going to market buy $500 million of Bitcoin.
That also.
Yeah. The other half will go towards infrastructure, specifically building energy infrastructure and Bitcoin mining. So this is why it's going to be called the Volcano Bond. And this is going to be a series. So this first bond is called the EBB1, or El Salvador Bitcoin Bond 1. But there will be more. 35% year over year is conservative. But at the end of the 10 years, or in the 10th year of the bond, your APY will be 146%. So the coupon is 6.5% for the first 5 years, and then it starts getting a Bitcoin boost. And I think this product is going to be incredibly attractive, even from the traditional financial industry or bankers, because there's no instrument like this on the market. So this is going to make El Salvador the financial center of the world. It's the Singapore of Latin America, and if the US continues declining, all of North and South America. So I'll just repeat Jack Mallers. We are here to change the world. We're here in El Salvador to change the world.
You have been one of the main proponents of Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador. You have been there multiple times. You have been collaborating with Bukele's government. So can you tell us what are the main achievements in terms of Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador that were achieved during this time since the Bitcoin law was adopted?
So I would say the biggest achievement is that they've managed to rebrand themselves as Bitcoin country, and they've drawn a lot more attention to themselves on the international stage. This is good on a number of reasons, because they're attracting more investments in the country. They're attracting a lot more tourism. I believe tourism is up 30%. And basically, they're the epicenter of nation-state Bitcoin adoption at this time. So they're doing quite well. Oftentimes, the media reports that El Salvador is at risk of default, but I would say they're far from that. They're growing their GDP in double digits right now. And if you look at their GDP growth and assume a marginal tax rate of 20%, they're probably up about $500 million in revenues this year. So that dwarfs any drop in the value of their Bitcoin holdings by far. The important thing is to look at what Bitcoin enables in El Salvador right now. And it's basically giving everyone in the country access to something like PayPal or Venmo or Wise, right? So they can make these digital payments, pay bills, pay other people without having to deal with an intermediary and without having to go through a lot of overhead, such as getting a bank account and maintaining a bank account.
The population of El Salvador was largely, and still is, unbanked. But according to a recent survey, up to around 24% of the population of El Salvador uses Bitcoin. So it seems to be not so much, but if you consider the fact that probably before Bitcoin, all those people didn't have any access to financial services, that is still a huge improvement. Still, a comparative little amount of people use Bitcoin in El Salvador as a form of payment, far less than the people that still want to use the dollar, for example, which is the second legal tender in El Salvador. So is that because, according to you, of the lack of sophisticated infrastructure, so infrastructure need to be improved, or is it because of a lack of education?
Well, all the aspects should be improved. I would say the lack of uptake on Bitcoin is largely because they need to still receive dollar-denominated value. So if you're a merchant and you're selling pupusas or selling drinks or things on the street, you're paying your supplier in dollars probably, right? So unless they're taking Bitcoin, you still need to collect payment in dollar-denominated value. So this is why Chivo is useful, because it allows them zero-fee conversion. So if a tourist goes to them and pays them in Bitcoin, they can get converted into dollars on the spot. So they're not at risk dealing with Bitcoin volatility. Overall, I would say if we want Bitcoin to be adopted as a form of like medium of exchange, just like accepting it and pricing it in Bitcoin, we need Bitcoin to go up a lot more to the millions of dollars per coin mark, where the volatility would be a lot less pronounced.
But that's going to take a long time. I think that education on how to use Bitcoin could probably have a faster effect on adoption in the country, no?
Yeah, I'm not sure it will take that long. Currency collapses happen very rapidly, and they're usually not anticipated. If you look at history, it just sort of happens overnight, and then you're shoveling cash into a wheelbarrow. So Bitcoin could be at the $1 million mark in 5-10 years. And I think the benefit of El Salvador adopting a Bitcoin standard is that they've already onboarded their population and started to educate them in how to use Bitcoin.
So as you said, El Salvador was famous for the gangs, for violence and so on. Since Bukele adopted like a strong hand towards these problems, the crime rates have fallen a lot.
President Bukele, I would say, is a pragmatist. He does what's needed, and he takes steps that will pay dividends off in the future. So the Bitcoin law is one of those things. He's preparing his country for the future, future-proofing it against fiat money collapse. The other things that he's doing to make the country safer, such as basically going to war against the terrorists that have been killing people, I mean, you can look at that from a nice and safe Western country and say, that's not ideal. But you have to deal with the reality on the ground, which is you have sophisticated networks of gangs that are killing people. So you should go after them. It's what pragmatism would dictate you need to do to keep the country safe. Without safety, it's difficult to grow a country in terms of GDP, attracting investment and tourism.
So a new bill has been introduced recently to the Parliament of El Salvador, which is the first step in order to create this Bitcoin bond, which is basically an initiative that will allow El Salvador to sell $1 billion worth of bonds, 10-year bonds, to investors. Half of it will be invested in Bitcoin, and the other half is going to be invested in Bitcoin infrastructure and this Bitcoin city that is going to be built in El Salvador. You are one of the big proponents of this. You are also called the architect of the Bitcoin bonds. Can you tell us how is the current state of this initiative at the moment?
Right. So as you mentioned, they've put forth the law to Congress, and this is the first step to enabling it. So first, they'll need to approve the law. Then they'll need to, I believe, form a regulatory body that would govern these digital securities. And then they'll need to put forth a prospectus, which would detail what the Bitcoin bonds would actually look like. So the design that we had, which was from last November, may be outdated. So they probably need to revisit that and see. But that was designed in a very different market when Bitcoin was about 47,000 and mining was profitable. Right now, hash rate difficulty is at an all-time high and Bitcoin price is down. So I think we need to look at the economics of the design of the bond.
So we still don't know when they're going to be available, more or less.
It's possible end of Q1, early Q2. It just depends on how fast everything goes and when they have the prospectus.
So it's just not a good or cool, a nice idea. It's the evolution of humankind. So we're going there. You can't stop evolution, but it's nicer if we are part of it. So it's nicer if we push it a little. For some reason, we're all here right now in Misata Beach, in El Salvador, looking into the future. Let's all be part of it. And let's all push the future even forward. Thank you, guys. Have fun.